Bible, we're going to be in Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 6. So if you would be turning there. And this will be following on just from where we looked at last week. Those of you that were here last week, I began looking at a sort of the subject of mercy and kindness. And we're going to be looking again at that in an incident that took place early on in Jesus' ministry. So Luke 6, I'm going to read the first few verses. It says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Jesus answered them, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Just a few verses this morning. And I just want to unpack it for us and see what we can draw from this. But early on in Jesus' ministry, he is going from village to village. He's teaching. And, of course, they didn't have cars in those days, so they have to walk. And so Jesus and his disciples are walking through the grain fields as they approach a village. And his disciples decide that they're going to do something. They're going to take some of this grain and they're going to husk it, and they are going to then start eating. And we might say, what's the big deal about that? And then the question comes. Some of the people who were there, and they said, why are you doing what is not permitted? You're not allowed to do that. And as I was reading this passage this week, it got me thinking about, I don't know whether you've ever been in a place whereby you feel like you're between a rock and a hard place. You ever feel like that? You ever feel like you're in a situation where whichever way you turn, you're going to do something, and that something might even go against what God wants you to do? Have you ever been there? Well, this scenario comes up, and I wanted to look at it with us and go, well, how do we then respond when we are in that situation? So Jesus is walking with his disciples. The way I read it, the way I think, he's probably heading towards a village, and Sabbath is just beginning. And maybe there's no promise of a meal when they get there. The disciples are hungry, and so they begin to eat. And now there's an accusation. How dare you do something you shouldn't be doing? I want to ask you some questions, get your brain to work a little bit, if that's okay this morning. Did you know that in the Bible, if we go back to the Old Testament, it doesn't actually say that you can't do that with the grain? Did you know that? It doesn't say that you can't do that on the Sabbath. It says you can't do any work. But then the theological group get together, right? And they go, well, what constitutes work? And what are you allowed to do and what are you not allowed to do? Have you heard this debate? What constitutes work? So the Jewish sages and rabbis, they get together and they go, well, let's devise some rules. By the way, like if you went to Israel today and it was a Sabbath, here's a scenario, and you're in a hotel, okay, and you are staying on the 15th floor of the hotel on the Sabbath, it's okay for you to walk the 15 flights of stairs, that's not considered work. But if you press the button for the lift, then that's considered work. Now, we think that's crazy, right? But that's the kind of thing, because it was this idea of you're not allowed to produce anything or create anything on the Sabbath. And so the rabbis, they came up with these extra rules. It would be like saying, there's a commandment in the Bible that says, do not touch a hot stove, okay? But the rabbis would then go, well, you know, if kids go in the kitchen, they're more likely to touch the hob. So we're going to make a rule that says no kids are allowed in the kitchen. Do you see that? They make an extra rule to stop them breaking a commandment. So there are extra rules that have been put in place. And they come to Jesus and they go, your disciples are breaking the extra rules. They're breaking the Sabbath. And Jesus then quotes David in 1 Samuel 21. You may not have read that story before. 1 Samuel chapter 21. David and his men are on the run, and they're out in the fields. By the way, you should, if you're a Bible student, be noting the connection between Jesus and his disciples out in the field and David and his men out in the field. There's a good little connection for you to study. David and his men are hungry. They come to the tabernacle and they say to the high priest, have you got any food? And the high priest is now between a rock and a hard place, because he says, well, I haven't got any food that I can give you, but I have got 12 loaves of bread, which are special loaves that are not for you. You can't eat them. Okay? So he is now in a difficult situation. If he says, no, you can't have the bread, he is now breaking a commandment by not showing love to his neighbor. But if he says, yes, you can have the bread, he's now breaking the commandment that says they're not allowed to eat the bread. Do you see the problem? Some of you are looking at me. Let me give you it in an illustration you will understand. I want to give you this story about an 8-year-old boy. This 8-year-old boy would go to church every Sunday evening with his parents, and they met in a high school because their church building was being redeveloped. And one Sunday evening after church, people are clearing away the chairs and all the sound equipment. Everything had to be removed. And normally this little 8-year-old boy would be running around the high school somewhere playing football with his friends. But this particular Sunday night, he's hungry. And looking around the hall, he sees something that hasn't been packed away yet. He sees the communion table. And so he decides, bearing in mind the service is over, he decides that he's going to go and take one of those lovely loaves at the front that are left over. And he begins to eat it. And all of a sudden, a church member becomes very angry. The church member comes up and says, doesn't your mother feed you at home? You shouldn't be eating that bread. Naughty, naughty boy. It's okay, I can call him naughty because it was me. I was the 8-year-old boy who decided that I was hungry, and I started to eat the leftover communion bread. The leftover communion bread that was going to be thrown away. The priest, in 1 Samuel 21, the loaves of bread that David could have, they were finished with. They were going to be thrown away because they'd baked 12 fresh loaves. So there's a connection. It was Sabbath, and it's Sabbath here in our story. So my question to you is, was the lady who got very irate and angry with me, was she correct? Was she correct to chastise me for eating the bread? Was it right? Was there a commandment that said you shouldn't eat the communion bread, it's special? Is there also a commandment that says we're to love each other and show compassion? Do you see the dilemma? Which is correct? And that's the dilemma that the priest had in this story. And the priest actually gave the bread to David. And Jesus uses this example. And Jesus turns around and he says, look at this example, why it's okay for my disciples to be eating. Do you see how that works? You see, the interesting thing is that in the Bible, the Bible that Jesus uses, in the Old Testament, there are commandments. There are both positive and negative. Yeah, are you aware of that? There are commandments that are negative. Thou shalt not do X, Y, Z. And there are positive commandments that say you shall do. Yeah? So here's the dilemma for the priest. Thou shalt not eat the bread. Thou shalt alleviate hunger and suffering and show kindness. Which one is greater? Well, Jesus is saying that actually it's greater and a better fulfillment if you show kindness rather than the negative. Some people have said to me, well, you know, sometimes Jesus did things and it was wrong what he did. Sometimes he touched a leper. Oh, he broke the law. He touched a coffin with a dead person. He broke the law. My answer is no, he didn't. He didn't break the law. Why? Because the Bible also says you are to bring life. You are to bring healing. And that supersedes the negative. So what happened when he touched the leper? What happened? He was healed. What happened when he touched the coffin? The person came back to life. You see, he was keeping the positive, which is the weightier matter, rather than the negative. And I think it's an interesting question that we have to ask ourselves. In what way do we operate? Do we operate according to the legalistic observance, or do we operate according to grace and love and compassion? Let me tell you another story. Here's another one for you. How about this 8-year-old boy who's now 17? And he's at the back of church. Quite a big church, lots of people, about 400 or 500 people. And I'm on the back row of the balcony. Okay? And I am doing something, and I know you will be absolutely horrified to think that your pastor would do this, okay? But I am on the back row with my friends, and I am wearing a baseball cap. Horrendous, I know. Behind the last row in the balcony, there was a walkway. And a church member came walking past, and as they walked past, reached over, flicked the hat off my head and said, "You shouldn't be wearing hats in church," and walked off. I picked up my hat, vacated the premises, and didn't go back into a church for many, many years. Was he right or wrong? We might say, of course he was right. Of course men should be wearing hats in church. Or was he wrong because it's how we approach this? Should it be done in a legalistic way, or was there a more gracious, loving, compassionate way? I wonder. Maybe food for thought when we think of situations that we may come across this week. situations whereby we may get a bit frustrated. We might get a bit annoyed. But are we responding in grace and compassion? Because we never know what's going on with the person that we are dealing with. That guy didn't know where I was up to, and he didn't know that I'd been struggling with my faith, and I'd been struggling with situation, and I was on the brink of leaving church, and he just happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Could he have operated differently? Yeah, I think he could. Would that have been a greater thing for him to do? And so Jesus here on the Sabbath is saying to his critics, while my disciples may be breaking your laws, is it not better to operate out of grace? Is it not better to operate out of compassion and kindness? Challenging, huh? Observance or grace? So as we think about this today, I wonder what situations we might face. Maybe you're in the queue at Morrison's. It's a bit longer than you'd hoped. Maybe someone's not got the change ready for when they get there, or maybe the girl on the till's having a meltdown. What's your response? What's your response when that person cuts you up? Alan's laughing. Do you shout in anger? You shouldn't be driving. What do you think you're doing? Or words to that effect. Or do we operate out of grace? And do we operate out of kindness? It's a challenge, right? And I think it's highly important, and I want us as a church to be a community that operate out of love and grace and compassion. I'll give you one more story. This time, I'm a minister, okay? So we've gone from 8-year-old, teenager, now I'm a minister. I'm actually a minister in training, like Pam is. And I'm in my church, and the church is a predominantly elderly church. We had one 13-year-old girl who would come, but other than that, nobody under 50. And many of you know this first part of the story, that when I went there, they didn't have a prayer meeting. So I said, I'm going to institute a prayer meeting every Thursday at 7 o'clock. I'm going to be at church. If you want to join me, you can. If not, it will just be me. Sometimes it was just me on a Thursday evening. Sometimes half the congregation would be there. But we prayed and we prayed for 18 months until one Sunday, just before I was due to leave, I accepted a call to a new pastorate. And that Easter Sunday, 3 families walk into our church, each with 3 kids, all primary age. And I remember sitting in a church meeting, and I remember saying to the congregation, along with the church secretary, saying, look, things are going to be a little different. Things are going to be different, but I don't want to hear complaining. I remember one Sunday I was preaching like I am now. There was a balcony like we've got kind of here, where people could sit in the balcony. And I remember I'm preaching, everyone's looking at me, and I see some of the kids go up in the balcony. You remember the little boxes of raisins you used to get? They've got these boxes of raisins, and they are throwing the raisins at some of the more mature ladies on the back row. I'm trying to keep a straight face. I'm preaching. And all I see is these raisins being lobbed. Next minute, I see a mother flying across the back of the church. Up she goes to sort it out. But you know, I look at that and go, I'd rather have the kids in the church. Because we had had 18 months and longer before I got there, of no families and no kids. And suddenly we've got kids and we've got families. Suddenly there's a Sunday school. Suddenly we've got a couple of the dads who become deacons. And they're still going as a church. They were ready for closing before I got there. And I'm not saying it's me. It was God. But I'm just saying, legalistic approach or grace? I wonder. Will we operate out of compassion? You know, God is a God of grace. He's a God of love. And he has shown me and you such incredible grace, even when we don't deserve it. Yes? But sometimes I think the danger is that we can operate that we think that God is gracious to us, but we tend to operate out of law to other people. But it's all by the grace of God. And we're going to sing the song that was sung at the beginning. Catherine and Pam are going to come and sing. And we're going to join with them. This song that says, by the grace of God. We are saved by grace, but we're also called to operate in grace. So I hope that we will do that together as we sing this song now. Some of you may know it, you may not. If you don't, just hum along. But if you're able to, would you stand as we sing by the grace of God?